Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi here. Weather in 5 days and 5 minutes. Coming up tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. As one major storm exits, another heads eastward. And winter is gradually overspreading much of the United States weather-wise, so we will get into it short, medium, and long range. That's tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time. So we have seen some improvement today as we start off with the satellite loop. Our storm has now moved its way up into southern Canada. We still have a lot of clouds around though, from western New England all the way back into the northern plains. Got a lot of upper air energy that has to still play through, and of course we're setting up for the next storm system, which is going to be almost identical to this one. That was, by the way, one of the more destructive January storms I think that I've seen on the East Coast in a long, long time when you take into account all the severe weather that occurred across the South and Southeast and everything else that happened up the Eastern Seaboard, including a squall line that produced hurricane-force wind gusts over parts of New Jersey and Long Island and some impressive coastal flooding. That, to me, was what stood out in all of this was the fact that the coastal flooding was as much as it was. And we're going to go through it all again on Friday from that standpoint because we're coming off a new moon on Thursday. So as we check out the watches, warnings, and advisories, we're starting to see the first winter storm watches going up in parts of Kansas and Nebraska. Also, a couple of winter storm watches are up for southernmost Michigan and northern Indiana. I suspect that areas around Chicago and Milwaukee will go under winter storm watches. We still have some leftover wind advisories though for much of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, down to the Delmarva Peninsula and into southern and southeastern New England. Kind of a windy day today, though well off the highs from last night, and we are going to see these advisories expire in short order, only to perhaps go back up again on Friday. In the west, winter storm warnings going on in Idaho, western Wyoming, down the Wasatch in Utah, northern California and southern Oregon, even out to the coast. We've got winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories up there in the northern half of Nevada and also down into Arizona. So that's all that energy from that next storm beginning to come eastward. So there are going to be severe weather issues once again. The Storm Prediction Center for tomorrow into Friday. It's pretty much the same thing that we saw ahead of this last storm. Eastern Texas, much of Louisiana, southwest Mississippi into southern Arkansas, and that comes, by the way, with a 5% tornado risk. And then as we head into Friday, into Saturday, we have already an enhanced risk being indicated by the Storm Prediction Center. Repeat performance here. I mean, almost line by line. The only difference this time around is that the marginal risk has been pushed up into Kentucky, but we've got slight risk from southern and central Mississippi, parts of southeast Louisiana, then going eastward through Georgia and on northeastward into North Carolina. Enhanced risk in southeastern Alabama, much of central and south Georgia, interior south and southwestern parts of North Carolina. So I think when we get there, this is going to be another situation where we're going to have at least a 5, if not a 10% tornado risk to deal with. So radar-wise, not a whole lot happening today. There's a little bit of leftover precipitation up in north central New York and up in northernmost Maine. Otherwise, seeing some snow showers with a little weak low in parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and also into southeastern South Dakota, northeastern Nebraska. And then, of course, out in the west, we continue to see this flow of moisture that's coming into the Pacific as they deal with cold weather and snows, particularly, again, in Northern California and in Southern Oregon. Rainfall-wise, perhaps this time around, we may get a little bit less in the way of rain, but still an additional inch to, in some cases, an inch and a half plus is possible from northeastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, about 3/4 of an inch to an inch, maybe down to southern New Jersey to Maryland, and then the amounts do lessen a bit from North Carolina on southward. I would just point out, though, that the threshold for flooding, river flooding, has been awful with this system in parts of the Northeast, particularly in Connecticut and parts of New York State. So it's not going to take a whole lot of rain to cause some more problems. So just bear that in mind. We're seeing heavy precipitation from southwestern Michigan back to around Chicago, an inch and a half plus, and then that also goes down into southern Missouri, and there'll be a fairly large part of this area of getting an inch or more of liquid that's going to wind up getting a foot or more of snow with this storm, and then you can see the moisture that continues out in the Pacific Northwest. Probability of at least 4. So this time around, this takes us to Saturday morning. We're looking at eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin. There is a 95% probability of at least 4 for places like Chicago and Milwaukee. Almost 85 to 90% probability for at least 4 for Detroit. And that extends up into southeastern Canada, so I think Toronto might be very much in the thick of it here, and points northeastward there up the St. Lawrence River Valley. That's the probability of 4. I'm going to do the probability for at least 12. Because we don't get to use this often, but definitely today. And notice the darkest blue is a 40% chance. The next shade of lighter blue is a 50% chance for at least a foot. And that definitely includes Chicago and Milwaukee. Of course, here in the Northeast, obviously it's not a problem with what's going on. This particular weather system, I'm just going to reduce it to the probability for 2, and there's going to be some lake effect that's going to be going on after the low goes by later Friday night and on Saturday, and that's why you see high probabilities in southwestern New York, northwestern PA, north central New York, and these areas are going to pick up in terms of activity probably right through this coming weekend. The storm system we're talking about is another major storm. It's, as I said earlier, it's identical to the one we just had. You can see it come out of the Rockies and into the southern plains, then makes the turn northeastward into southern Illinois. This is Friday afternoon. The gradient gets pretty tight again. I don't know if it's as tight as what we just had, but you know what? It's awfully close. And this low actually is a little bit stronger than the last one, than the one we just had. Hard to imagine. The only thing is, and this is something I'm going to try to pay attention to, is to see if the subtropical jet in the Pacific sets up the same way as it often does in major storms. You know, there's only so much energy the atmosphere can spend, and once it's spent it out, it needs to sort of regroup. But this storm is going to be this is going to be a formidable storm as it heads up to the Great Lakes. So we're going to have wind and heavy rain and the potential for probably some flash flooding. And we'll be looking for the possibility of thunderstorms up and down the eastern seaboard, or at least from the mid-Atlantic states southward. This front is going to go by. The one plus in this is that it will move fairly quickly, so it's probably going to be another one of these 6 to 8 hour events. And then over the weekend, we have cold weather spreading all across the plains, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, down into the south and east into the mid-Atlantic states and northeast. You see the lake effect machine will be working right into Sunday. And then I'll give you a heads up here because the areas along the coast have been neglected, but it seems that we've spent the last week or so putting snow down in places that didn't get any snow in the month of December, and that was pretty much the whole United States. So we're starting to play a little bit of catch up, and I think there's a shot here that we could see low pressure develop along the East Coast later Monday night and into Tuesday that could perhaps bring some accumulating snows up through the Appalachians and then for the northern Mid-Atlantic and into southern New England. A little early in the game, but I certainly think it's a possibility, and after that, it's going to get very cold again as we move through the latter part of next week. So much more on all of this tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast, and again, that's coming up at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time, so please join us. There's plenty of room for everybody.